Joining me in studio for a roundtable discussion are all former guests here on the program. Debbie Dooley, one of the original co-founders of the Tea Party movement, and Janelle Jones, Director of Community Affairs for the Georgia Republican Party, and Jake Evans, Executive Vice President of Atlanta Young Republicans. Thank you all for coming in and taking the time.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Debbie, I'll start with you. Did the president wait too long in calling out these groups by name and denouncing their behavior and even ideology?
Well, you know, for the record, I believe that white supremacists are low-life scum. So I don't hold them. I mean, I have just cannot stand them. I just despise them. But both sides were violent at the protest. You had the anarchist thugs that were there to disrupt the protest of the white supremacists. Mm-hmm. So both sides were violent. And I think the president called out both sides. I think I would have liked for him to call out and specifically talk about racism. It is just, you know, how horrible it is, and that this country was built on the concept that all men are created equal. But he did call out both sides. What I don't see is a lot of the Democrats actually calling out the anarchists for their part in the violence, and that's something I would have liked to have seen too.
Why do you refer to them as anarchists?
Well, I think it's Antifa, and however you pronounce it. These are groups that are out there. They protested at the I help organize nationwide Spirit of America rallies that took place February 27th and March the 4th across the nation. And a lot of these thugs that wore masks, some wore helmets, and dressed in black were there to disrupt and cause violence at a peaceful demonstration. Look what happened in Berkeley, when people were exercising their First Amendment rights, and they were there to cause disruption. And there's been acts of violence all over the nation from these groups of cowardly thugs, and I would like to see them denounced.
We'll get to that in a minute. Janelle, did the president move too slow in calling out these groups by name?
I don't think so. Before I get started, I did want to make a small correction. I am the Community Affairs Director for the Georgia Young Republicans.
Oh, my God.
So
my apologies, young.
Right. But you know what? The way I see it is I think he was making sure that he had all the information. Immediately when it occurred, you know, originally it started out as it's supposed to have been a peaceful protest, just expressing, you know, their rights. And then it kind of switched in a quick second. So I think he took his time to make sure he had accurate information. That's something he's been criticized for in the past, is being too quick to respond on issues. And so, I was waiting to just make sure, you know, he did say something about it, which he did. He did, you know, call out David Duke, and, you know, and I will say that even his children.
Well, when did he call out David Duke?
Well, he called out the KKK, white supremacy, you know, all that, you know, but, and I will say that, you know, even his children were making comments and posting immediately when it happened. So I think as the president, we can expect him to make sure he has all the facts first.
Jake?
Sure. First, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Rose. It's good seeing you again. As Debbie said, I think the most important thing at the inception is, as a Republican, to express really our unambiguous condemnation of what happened in Charlottesville. I don't think any Republican would advocate or support what happened there. I think everyone can pretty much agree that it's antithetical to the principles that America was built on, and it's something that we don't want to advocate. I also think it's important to note, as Debbie said as well, that there's radicals on both sides, and that's a very, very unfortunate reality. And if you look at the congressional shootings at the baseball field recently, and so to me, the more important question is not so much who is to blame for all this, but the more important question is how to resolve it. And I remember, you know, years ago when President Obama was in office, all of the criticism that he was increasing the gender, or he was increasing the racial divide, he was empowering Black Lives Matter, and regardless of whether that's right or wrong, the reality is here we are again, and I think there's a lot of criticism about Donald Trump empowering the white supremacists, which are people that should be condemned to the maximum extent possible. But I think it's more important to step back and think about how can we correct this. And to me, the answer is it starts at the micro level. Although leaders at the top level do influence those, the people that have the strongest influence are the parents, the teachers, the mentors, the educators. And so to me, the more important question is how can we help them understand the importance of teaching young people and old people the importance of inclusion, the importance of diversity, the importance of tolerance, because I think those are key principles that both Democrats and Republicans espouse and things that we want to keep promoting and furthering forward.
Jake, I want to stay with you for a moment because you mentioned teaching the principles of inclusion and diversity. I don't need to tell anyone at this roundtable that that's something that has been a challenge for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. Let's look at labels and definitions, because if you have groups that are rallying in protests, whether it's to keep a Confederate monument, and that group consists of self-identified white nationalists, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and the KKK. And Janelle, I'm going to ask you, because you are a woman of color. Mm-hmm. We're talking about groups that believe they are superior to other races, and in the past have lynched and killed and burned crosses on people's yards. So can you understand if someone says this is a group that's marching and also align themselves with the current administration, whether it's fair or not, can you understand the perception that this is an alignment with a racist group of people?
As far as the president being in alignment, or
just the perception
in general? Oh, well,
if because these are the groups that are marching, and at the same time, in the past, we've seen them while marching, chanting, "Hail Trump."
Well, I would say that, it's all about what you give life is what will continue to live. And so in this regard here, it's impossible to be able to control anyone and what they believe. We're going to believe what we want to believe. Yes, as a woman of color, I do, take offense to these groups on a different level. However, what I also know is that I believe they understood that by attaching themselves to President Trump and to this administration, that it's just another means of giving them life, because it gives media attention. It continues to push the agenda. If anything, sometimes the hardest thing to do is just to do nothing. And what I mean by that is, if you see that these are the groups that are out there, of course, emotionally, you want to respond. But at times you have to realize that, sometimes you just have to let them be. I personally don't agree that, we should go and empower them by making the protest bigger, fighting, doing additional things. If anything, I feel that the best thing we could have done, for those who did go out there, was to just let them have their peaceful protest and keep moving. We can't ban protesting.
How peaceful is protesting if the protesters are carrying torches, which we all know the history and symbolism of that, Debbie Dooley? And why shouldn't someone want to counter protest that, even if it's in a peaceful way?
They have every right to counter-protest in a peaceful way, but we did not see that in Virginia.
But do we know who started the clash?
I've seen a lot, and I've heard, I think the local police actually issued a statement saying that violence was coming from both sides. It was not just one side. And I don't believe for a moment they're attached to President Trump, no more than I believe that a lot of the violent Black Lives Matter protest, where you saw rioting and looting and the attacks on police officers, should be attached to President Obama. I can remember when you had 5 officers gunned down in Texas, and President Obama's statement was, well, we need to get all the facts to come in. He took his time making a statement condemning that. You did not see the widespread condemnation of him like you see with President Trump. Everybody has a right. Personally, if people, I thought what would have done more to actually diminish these groups would be for people to counter-protest and laugh at them and make fun of them when they started marching, is to ridicule them instead of being violent. The police are culpable with what happened. I'm one of the national co-founders of the Tea Party movement, so we've had a lot of protest, even the Spirit of America rallies. And one of the things that has always been done at protest is that you keep the counter-protesters and the protesters with the permit completely separate. You don't mix the groups together. And the police officers had a stand-down order. I heard a lot of condemnation about the way the police handled it from both the left and right. They herded these people together. They created a powder keg that erupted.
Jake, how problematic is this for the Republican Party if these groups, who are many of them Trump supporters, and align themselves with Trump and the Republican Party, how problematic is that for the party?
Yeah.
Do you think it is?
I think that's a great question. And I think that question hits on a core concept, which is what you hit earlier, which is the danger of generalizations. You can't create and extrapolate and impute what these radical white supremacists did to a general everyday Republican, because they're not. I don't think there's any legitimate Republican that would say that and embrace these white supremacists as a part of our party, as a part of furthering what we believe in as a party. And I think it is very unfair, and I've seen it. I think, Janelle and Debbie have both probably seen the reality that if you're a Republican, if you're a pro-Trump supporter, you're a xenophobe, you're racist, you're intolerant. That's not true. And I think the people that say that create a very unfair position for most Republicans to be in. I mean, people that believe in fiscal responsibility, people believe it bringing the bottom up, not creating a system of lifetime dependency, but putting them in a position to help themselves, help them earn success, and long-term job viability is what we're all about. We're not about these radical positions, and imputing that to us as Republicans is very unfair.
So given what Jake just said, Janelle, then what should the Republican Party do in terms of nationally denouncing these groups? You all have resolutions that you agree to during your convention. Is it now time for the Republican Party to officially denounce these groups and any affiliation with them?
Well, I believe that's what has been happening. President Trump and the administration has been denouncing these groups from the beginning. The fact is that, because of free speech, we can't control what they say. However, I will say I do not believe, or I've never experienced a situation where the Republican Party has said that we are, in support of these groups. So to say, is there a time to denounce it, is to assume that we were ever in support. But we were never in support of these groups.
Well, but sometimes a resolution may lend to the core of people out there who believe that you are afraid to lose this base, this support, because you haven't. Officially denounced.
Let's be clear too that the base is not as large as it appears to be. I believe there's about I believe based on research that there is only about 1,600 major social media sites that are empowering these groups. So when you think of the number of people here and the number of people that support the Republican Party, this is a very small group of people who we assume all support the Republican Party. However, I don't think it's a something that, like Jake was saying, it does not make up the majority of the Republican Party. What I will say is that I am an advocate of messaging. I am an advocate that the Republican Party we can do better when it comes to messaging.
Okay, then when next year during the midterm elections, then should candidates really then use that message of more of inclusiveness as opposed to something like what we saw in Charlotte.
Well, I believe that a lot of times when Republican Party or candidates, we speak to all Americans. That is what we were saying as far as inclusiveness. Now, due to the fact that the Democratic Party typically uses identity politics against us, so that kind of forces the party to have to, speak on specific issues. However, we've always been a party of inclusiveness as far as, especially when let's look at, the African American community, and the Republican Party is assisting us and giving us the right to vote and being behind us, allowing us to have the right to vote. So
now,
what I will say...
But you're referring to a Lincoln Republican Party.
Absolutely.
Which is different from the current Republican Party, Janelle.
That's debatable.
Well...
That's a little debatable. I mean, we have a little bit of both. However, but we can't deny history, because that's what this whole protest was about, right? So we can't deny history. So I will say that we have to just keep in mind that, when it comes to inclusiveness, I will agree that we can, in lieu of what has happened, we definitely have to adjust our messaging a little bit. But, we've always been a part of inclusion.
Debbie, Senator Cory Gardner, Republican from Colorado, tweeted, "Mr. President, we must call evil by its name." And then earlier today, my colleague Dennis O'Hare interviewed Georgia Republican Senator Johnny Isakson and asked him this.
Other Georgia Republicans, though, including Senator Perdue and Congressman Barry Loudermilk, have denounced violence without naming white supremacists. So are you worried that the Republican Party, while it might not be co-opted by white supremacists, is at least in a place where some of its leaders might be politically afraid to confront them or name them?
Well, I don't think that's the case, first of all. Second of all, I think a lot of the press is making more of that particular vein of the subject than they should. That being said, everybody, as I said yesterday, and as I said on the Sunday morning, the specificity of the denouncement of the Klan and white supremacists and Nazis should be without equivocation. There's no room for that in our country, and there's no room for politicians to allow it to exist.
Now, that's from a conversation listeners will hear Wednesday on Morning Edition with Dennis O'Hare. Debbie, you heard Senator Isakson there. You agree?
I agree, but I don't think it's always necessary to, evil is evil. I thoroughly believe, and I grew up in the South, when the KKK was out burning crosses as a young girl, and they're evil. David Duke, I'm from Louisiana, that is an evil man. David Duke is just, I'd like to ship him out of this country somewhere, but he has a right to be here. But what I would like to see happen is I would like to see the Democrat Party pass resolutions condemning violence of their fringe groups.
For example?
For example, these counter-protesters. These protesters during the campaign that were showing up at Trump events, protesting, resorting to violence. In New York City, a lot of hate. They were there protesting against hate, but you should have heard some of the things that they were saying. And as a Republican, and the Republicans I know, we have always judged people by their character, not the color of their skin. And that's something I think is very important. We have to respect each other's differences. But evil is evil. But the Democrats and the mainstream media needs to call out evil on the left as well.
Can you give an example of when mainstream media has refused to call out evil on the left?
Well, the Berkeley protest, when Spirit of America Trump supporters were rallying.
Was there a loss of life?
There was not, but there were a lot of injuries that were there. Just because there's not a loss of life does not mean it's okay. It's okay to be violent and loot and riot as long as you don't, no one loses their life. There have been people injured. At the march in Virginia, these anarchists, these little cowards that hide behind black masks and black clothing were actually throwing pepper spray and acid on people.
But you agree that we saw violence on both sides.
I agree, totally agree.
There was an African-American man who was chased into a parking garage that was beaten by 6 or 7 of the other protesters.
Well, I was at, we had a Dixie, it's called Dixie Maggots, a meetup event we had Saturday in Atlanta from Trump supporters. There was a young man from New York City He had a broken nose. His face was all cut up. And he was attacked in New York City because he wore a Trump hat. There are attacks like that going on that needs to be denounced as well.
You all agree that there is an issue here. Obviously, there is a problem. But because you all represent the Republican Party, which is why we invited you here today, what solutions do you have then? What recommendations do you have to your party? Because we are talking about your party and as it relates to Charlottesville, and because of the self-aligned voters who claim they're supporting Trump and who have been chanting "Hail Trump." David Duke said, quote, "We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump." Because he is David Duke, and because of the other alliances with the neo-Nazis and white supremacists and white nationalists, you all recognize that's a problem. So what can you offer to your Republican Party to fix it?
Well, I would speak for me as an African-American woman. One of the things that I am offering currently and what I will continue to offer is conversations around cultural diversity, making sure that we understand the differences that do exist. Yes, we are all Americans. However, there are certain specific issues that are pertain to different ethnic groups, and making sure that we are mindful of that our messaging speaks to that, and just representing the party in a sense of inclusion. That's something that I definitely can offer and continue to do. Working with the Atlanta Young Republicans and the Georgia Young Republicans, we are very committed to diversity and making sure that inclusion is on the top of our list. So that's a personal message for me that I will do on a micro level, as Jake said.
Yeah, no,
Go ahead, Jake.
And I'll say there is hope. And the hope in that is, being a millennial, we are the most diverse generation in American history. I mean, I grew up with more minorities than any previous generation. And so to me, the comfort with people who look different, who come from different cultural backgrounds, who come from different socioeconomic backgrounds is much more heightened than maybe it was in the past. And so, not to say it is a generational issue, but I will say that I think moving forward, and this is one of the issues that you hit on earlier, given the changing demographics in America, with more minorities coming in, with the white base electoral vote likely decreasing, that does put the Republican Party in an interesting position.
Why?
I wouldn't say, well, because, as you've alluded to, the base is typically white. However, for the viability of the party, that can't and should not always be the case. And so, and my last point is, I think that I agree 100% with what Isaacson said. I mean, I think it should have been unambiguous condemnation of what happened. And I think, as I've said earlier, leading by example, leading through act, not necessarily words, which corroborates the inclusion, the diversity, the tolerance, is, in my opinion, the direction the Republican Party should continue to go in.
Debbie, I'm going to give you the last word.
Very simple. The Democrat Party has neglected the inner city. I think Republicans should focus on bringing jobs and economic prosperity to the inner cities. Just because you're poor does not, and you live in a poor area, does not mean that you don't crave and dream of having a good paying
But
job.
Debbie, now there are poor rural communities too.
That there are, but there are a lot of minorities and more in the inner cities, and I think that's what we focus on, bringing economic prosperity to everyone, to the inner cities, to all races, and give them economic opportunity.
As we wrap up, and I promise this is my final question, can President Trump, our commander-in-chief, can he be better in all of this in terms of the tweets, his narrative? If it's truly about unity, can he be better?
I think President Trump could walk on water and he would still be criticized because it's his policy. Yes, he can be better. But as a Southerner, I think most people find it hard to believe that a New York Yankee is racist. I mean, and associates with white supremacists or even condones that. I think he could be better in the tweets, but it doesn't matter. The mainstream media, he could walk on water and raise someone from the dead in the mainstream media, and left would still complain about it.
Janelle?
I would say that the mark of a good leader is the ability to grow and change and to look at every situation and find a way to be better. So I would assume that, or I would say that absolutely, you can definitely always become better as a good leader.
Jake?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. I mean, I think we all have room for improvement. I think that Trump comes from a very interesting background in that he's an outsider and he's not a lifelong politician. And for a lot of people, that change creates difficulty. But there's progress to be made, no doubt about it. I think, obviously, given the results of the presidential election, his messaging and what he proposes, a lot of people agree with, and as a result of him trying to implement that, the media is always going to give him a very, very slim margin of error, which has proved to be true.
Blaming the media, Jake?
Not you, Rose.
Not you, Rose. You're great.
Rose.
We love you, Rose. We love you, Rose.
I don't know, Debbie. Debbie Dooley, one of the original co-founders of the Tea Party. Janelle Jones, Director of Community Affairs for the Georgia Young Republican Party. Jake Evans, Executive Vice President of the Atlanta Young Republicans. Thank you all for coming in and being a part of this important conversation.
Well, thank you for
having
having us.